Welcome to episode 2 of the Written Well podcast. Episode 1 was fun. We had some subscribers on YouTube, some listens on Spotify and iHeartRadio. Some people seemed to like it, which was surprising to me.
Not surprising, but gratifying. It's nice. It's nice to think that you're not just shouting into the void.
Yeah, I've done a lot of that, and
Oh,
no one ever answers.
sometimes the void stares back. Sometimes we just cuddle.
Yeah, come get some, Void.
So, episode 2, we're going to talk about the process,
Yes, specifically getting started.
getting started.
And
I like.
at the beginning of every episode, we've decided to talk quickly about a bit of inspiration. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably an aspiring writer, and getting started in particular is a tough thing to do. So we're going to talk quickly, give something. It's almost like a moment of gratitude from our past week since the last episode. That is a reason that you should want to be a writer and want to be a self-published author and make your living doing it. And mine is that I busted a $10,000 poker tournament yesterday, and I didn't care. I do whatever I want now, and it's not like I'm making so much money in writing that I can light $10,000 on fire every day, but I don't have to care. I don't have to have a schedule. I don't have to, I can just go play that tournament when it comes up, and I can just go do the things I want to do. And that's just amazing, and that's one of the reasons that it's worth putting in the work to make a living for yourself.
I made plans to go out east and visit my mom and my sister, going out there with my family. And I didn't have to ask anyone if I could get the time off to do it. And
That's nice.
it is real nice, and especially around the holidays, because I worked 5 years in a warehouse, in a retail warehouse. And it's real nice not to have to schedule around Black Friday and Christmas Eve, which
Yeah,
are
to be
hellish
able to
times in the
yeah, to
retail
be able to book
industry.
whichever flight is cheap and to be able to go when all those things are so helpful.
Yeah, the dates flexible flying is a thing now that I can do,
Yeah.
which
I
is
I got up this morning when I wanted to.
I'd never want to get up in the morning. So that's
Yeah,
never
right.
whatever time I wake up is too early.
Yeah, I got up this afternoon when I wanted to.
All right, so
So,
getting started on a project, it is for me, I think that's where most people who want to be writers have the most trouble, and it's what keeps most people from being writers. There's a huge amount of resistance, both internally and externally, to staring at a piece of paper and putting words on it.
and there are a lot of approaches to getting around that, but a lot of people get stuck in that spiral. What do I do? What do I do? I can't do this. I don't know what to do here. I'm still sitting here. I'm gonna start writing as soon as I feel inspired. I'm gonna, you get stuck in your own head, and if you just instead pick a thing, go Google it, go learn about a particular thing, whatever it is, just take that first step. Things are much easier. Just do something.
Well, the too long didn't read for this podcast. This particular episode is going to be just start writing, because there's no replacement for putting words on paper, and you can't edit a blank piece of paper. You can't revise it. You can't do anything with it. Whereas a piece of writing, no matter what shape it's in, you can then work on it. The hard part is done. You've gotten something out.
So let's talk about the different ways to begin a story. Some people just sit down with a page and start writing. Some people outline. Some people plot. Some people write out character sheets. All kinds of different things. What do you do?
I have done it in a remarkably wide assortment of ways, because I'm always of the opinion that I should do whatever the story requires. And some stories require different things. I like to start with a character. Is my favorite way to start a book, is just think of an interesting character and get writing. But that doesn't always work. I've written a couple thrillers now, and I have to start. The first one I started much more with a plot than characters. The second one, I had the characters already, so I just took off with that one. When I write fantasy, if I'm writing epic fantasy, I like to start with the setting, which I think is a great place for fantasists to start, because you're creating a whole new world. And if you just sit down and start writing, it can be very difficult because you have to make up every place they go out of whole cloth. So for a fantasy novel I've got coming out next year, I spent a whole lot of time world building before I wrote anything down. But in general, I'm more of what's called a pantser rather than a plotter, where I'm flying by the seat of my pants. But not entirely, as my recent books can attest to.
We've talked about this before, how and I've talked about it with other fantasy authors too. Some people feel like when they have to build every bit of the place that people go, it's almost like walking around with a flashlight and having to having to write and create everything they shine the light on. And for me, it feels like a lot less pressure when I'm writing in a non-real place, because I can make up whatever I want. And if I'm writing things that happen in the real world, then they have to be accurate and I have to get things right. So it feels like more work for me that way.
That's interesting, because I wrote urban fantasy first. My first few books were urban fantasy. So I was able to walk the areas that my characters were. I was able to look up the setting for them, and that was easier for me because I didn't have to write it. And then when I remember writing my first epic fantasy, and I was just exhausted after every chapter because I had to make up every spot they went. But that was also one that I started that one with a character. I had a picture of a character in my mind, and I just sat down to write with that character. So then I was building the world as I was writing. So the next time I went back to write, I wrote actually a full 3-book series of that. But the second and third books were easier, because though I had to make up a few different locations for them to go to, I had most of the world already mapped out. So it wasn't as exhausting. So when I started a new trilogy in a new world, I didn't want to face that again. So I did a really extensive, probably like month-long world building for that world, with gods and creation myths and a couple thousands of years of history and empires melding and taking over each other, and the cultures that arose from that. So when I started to write, I already knew everything about the world.
It must be an approach to problem solving where for some people it's easier to have all that stuff and then write within that world. And for me, it's easier to start writing and then build the world to solve the problems I have.
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny thing is, to the reader, the experience is exactly the same.
Sure.
And that I always remind myself of that when I'm writing, is that I can always go back and make it look like I meant to do it that way the entire time. Until a reader reads the book, it's not finished. So everything is malleable, everything is changeable. I try and set myself limits so that I'm not going back and rewriting the novel every time I have a new tiny idea. But a writer was online the other day and said they would get characters that would wake them up in the middle of the night, stand at the end of the bed and say, I have to go in your book. I have to go in here. And then they wake up and they'd put in the character, and it would break the whole book, and they'd have to go and rewrite the whole thing around this new interesting character. And they're like, how do I avoid doing that? And I, of course, said, yeah, kill him.
Problem solved.
They'll stop showing up if you kill them every time they do.
Or stop sleeping.
Stop sleeping. It's easier to kill characters.
I think Interesting that, the ways you can get words started writing on a page. We're going to talk about a bunch of tools later and things like that can help, but you just pick a thing to start with, the kind of thing you mentioned, where if you start with a character. So if you want to write something, you must have something in your head. You must have a voice, a theme, a character, a setting, a plot, something. So start writing that thing. I've got a book where I had a narrator's voice in my head. I knew who this narrator was. He was fascinating. And so I started writing in his voice. And there it was. And there came the book. I have other books where I had a plot in my head. I wanted this specific thing to happen. I have a book where I wrote a short story that just kind of flew out of my brain in a hotel room in 4 hours. I wrote this like 8,000 word short story, and I loved it. It was a very thick voiced cyberpunk short story, and I loved it. And I showed it to my friends, and they loved it. And I put it on. It was the first thing I ever self-published, actually. I put it on Amazon like more than 10 years ago, and just out of curiosity to see what it would be like. And then I forgot about it. And then I went back like 5 years later, and I had $600 in my Amazon account because people bought it. And so I turned it into a book. I liked it was the end of a novel, as most short stories are. So I turned it into a book. You can start with anything. So if you have a character, sit down and start writing about a thing that character does. No words are wasted. You don't have to put this thing in the draft. Just sit down and get started, because part of the writing is you're not creating a draft necessarily. You're figuring out what the draft is going to be when you start writing. Sometimes what you start writing doesn't even go there. If it's a theme, start writing something in that theme, and just don't worry about if you write a bad thing. You're going to write a bunch of bad stuff.
I two things on that. First of all, you need a lot less than people think to get started writing. I wrote an entire story that I sold, where all I had for the story was a single line, and the line was, "The dragon is not a metaphor." That's all I had when I sat down to write. I thought that was a cool line. And so I sat down and I said, what comes next? And then I described the dragon. And then it went on from there. It turned into a very interesting story. So you don't need much, and things can change. I had a character I had thought of, and started writing with that. And it was a different character in some fundamental ways by the time it started, because the character I'd started with just didn't fit in with the story that came out of that. So there's a couple of things. You don't need as much as you think you did, and also don't be afraid to leave the spark behind. Sometimes your original idea sparks a different story, and the original idea can come into conflict with the story that you're now writing. And people get caught up with, well, I can't write this story because the idea was different, especially if the idea is from real life, something real that happened to you, and then the story is different. Just let it happen. We're not journalists. We're fiction writers. Let the story happen. If it happens to leave the framework, idea, the character, whatever that you started with it, don't be a zealot about that idea. It's not precious. It's just a starting point. My second thing is, we talk a lot about our successes as writers because it's a very frustrating business. So you want to concentrate on that. But I also want to tell people, don't worry about having an idea, writing a paragraph, a page, 2 pages, and going, that didn't work, and throwing it away. My folder on my hard drive is filled with paragraphs, lines, starts, pages of projects that I don't throw away, but I'll probably never finish, because they're not right. Sometimes I'll go visit them every once in a while. Can I finish this? No. Occasionally I'll hit something that gives another idea, or I'll finish that story. But, there's 100 of them, and that's going to happen too. So, but don't get frustrated. I had an idea for a World War I horror story that I think it took 5 tries to start. And it's because I would start it, then I'd do some research and realize that the research, what actually happened, nullified the entire idea for the story. So I tried again. and again and again. I finally hit one and it sold. So it's, don't worry about the failures. I mean, you're going to have it's like the rejection rate in traditional publishing. It's 1 out of every 10 is going to actually work.
What froze me up and that I had to get past was that I had this idea. I think it's from movies and other books, and that you have this idea that when people write a first draft, they sit down and they write 250 pages of book, and then they have a first draft. And that's how you do it. As if someone comes to you and hands you an old school typewriter and 200 blank pages, and then this is what you have to do. And that's not how it works. You have infinite blank pages. It doesn't matter. And you can write 10 of them, throw them away. You can write 10 more, keep 2 things from that, throw it away. Take those, you can do all that. It's not that. You can just start with a character, write some stuff that fleshes out that character, and then not use any of that stuff except that you now know that character, and put them in the story and write another character, and eventually all comes together. A first draft doesn't work like that, where you just have to sit down and do the thing from start to finish, and then you have the thing. It doesn't have to be like that. Your end product should be a mostly written book.
It should appear like it went that way.
The process is a Jeremy Bearimy looking thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're constantly stuck in the dot on the I. Yeah, it's not, and there's no rules to how you first draft it. You can write the middle first. You can
if you're a psycho.
Yeah, I know, but people do it. I did that once in a short story because I'm
a psycho.
The only scene I absolutely knew was going to be in the story was the one like right before the end. So I wrote that scene first, and then I started at the beginning, because sometimes the middle tells you more about your characters. So you write a middle chapter first. Sometimes you write a whole book and you discover it's the second book in a trilogy.
Oh.
And the stuff you thought that was backstory is actually the first book in the trilogy. And that can be distressing, but it's not a straight road, and it's not, and the more you try and fight it, the more frustrated you get. You got to figure out, like we said in the last podcast, I'm sure you got to figure out how you write, and it's unlikely that you are just going to sit down and write your story. Now, I love writing, character histories and world histories. I like writing timelines and things that then inform the characters in your book.
I don't do that at all.
See, I think it helps.
I know a lot of very good writers do it. It's maybe a thing I should do, but I discover that as the character wanders around, the characters tell me that stuff, and I can't do it.
For me, it helps them resonate in a real way. If I know everything about them, then their actions have a natural internal consistency that
I think this
makes sense.
This brings something to life in my head. When we were talking about the puzzle solving difference earlier, I think what it is if I do all that stuff ahead of time, I'm not intrigued to solve a puzzle now. Whereas if I walk my character through the story and I get to the point where he has to solve a puzzle, now I'm fascinated, and I love the idea that I have to build these things to solve this puzzle, and it keeps me interested. If I build the stuff ahead of time, if I wireframe out a whole book ahead of time, I'm more of an outliner than you are, but if I wireframe the whole thing out ahead of time, then I don't want to write it, because I already know what happens, and I know all these problems
you're like a 3/4 outliner.
Yeah. I want part of the plot and 2 of the characters really fleshed out, and 1 of the conflicts, but I want to figure out how to tie them all together myself. Yeah.
See, I want to outline all my characters and my whole setting so that I know all that, and then completely discover the plot as we go along. And then when the plot makes no sense, I go back and fix it with an outline. Okay, how does this all work? It was fun. The second book in the Mika Bearhand books was, I wanted to do the first book had a worldwide problem, end of the world stakes. So the second one, I wanted to do a much more personal one. So that was really all I had, kind of the theme I wanted to have, my moral character helping out his best friend, who is rather immoral. So, and that's all I wanted. And then as the book went on, I discovered a global conspiracy was happening that was tied into the small problem that the characters were having, which was very fun. It was a surprise to me that we once again had near world ending stakes when I was trying to write just a quieter book.
I would not have guessed that book went together that way. I would have thought
That's
you
the
went the other
key.
way. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
would
the
have
key.
thought you had this big problem to write this big book about, and then you had to figure out a small problem to bring those characters into it.
No, well, I retconned it so it looked like I knew all that at the beginning.
You tricked me, you bastard.
Excellent. Well, that's the plan.
So I think, one of the ways, if you're stuck and you're not getting started, and we've talked about all the things you can do, is what do you have? Write it down. Open up a document and write it down. If you have a plot, you want this thing to happen with this twist in it, write that down. Now, ask yourself questions like, how am I going to, what characters will go well in this plot? And write that question down. Then answer it. You don't have to keep all these answers. You're not locked into anything, but then answer it. How will these characters, and then you've got characters. How will these characters affect this plot? And write it down. Do that stuff. If you just have a character, like I had with my narrator, just write down all the stuff you know about him and what he's going to talk about and who he would be friends with and what kinds of things would happen to him. And then, what I discovered was a really interesting kid in the school he worked in that became a character that he interacts with. And then the plot comes from there. Just figure out what you do have, whether it's a setting, a theme, a plot, and go from there. Or think about what kind of book it is you want to write. If you're going to write a thriller, go read about a thriller. We're working this podcast is part of a big project that's going to involve a site where we teach people about self-publishing, and we have genre guides for each of the genres. If you're going to be writing a thriller, you can look at all the things you can learn about a thriller, and so that can help you figure out what you need to do. If you have a plot, you can go look, is this actually a thriller? What things do I need to add to this to make it a thriller? And write that stuff down. You're going to end up with pages and pages right away of information about your book that's going to hopefully inspire you to start actually writing it or help you plan it out.
I find when I'm writing down ideas, I just keep writing them down until one of them jumps back at me. Because you're just writing them, and then you finally hit one, and it kind of leaps off the page at you. You're like, oh, that one interests me. That one's got some teeth to it.
Mm-hmm.
And you start writing, and the more you write, the more you understand what ideas lead to different things. Because there's a difference between a novel idea and a short story idea, a poem idea, a flash story idea, and you kind of start to recognize what the idea is for. Usually, I have started some short stories that have turned into novels. Which have sometimes that kills the project. Sometimes I think I'm writing a short story and I realize it's a novel, but I'm already working on 2 other novels and I have to back burner it.
Mm-hmm.
I was just taking a little break to write a short story, and you're like, oh no, this is a much longer thing.
I've got a whole time for this.
I know I've got a whole novel idea, but it's a standalone, and it's kind of literary, kind of fantasy, kind of historical, and it's just it may or may not be very saleable. And in self-publishing, it's not a series, so it would be very hard. So I like the idea, but it's going to get triaged to the bottom of the list for a long, long time.
I find one of the things that can get me writing is I don't have to always write to create a book or sell a book. Sometimes I just get stories in my head that won't leave me alone. And sometimes I'm just writing them to make them go away. And if they turn into a book or a short story or they become useful, great. And that's generally what's happened. If a story is stuck in my head long enough that I go, fine, I'll just write this thing to just make it shut up, then it usually turns into something.
That is fantastic. I was raised in a writing family. It never occurred to me not to write for publication, because I thought that's what everybody did. I didn't know there was just journaling or fanfic or any other of the forms of writing, which all count. I don't do them because it just never occurred to me.
Which is
So
interesting that in most cases, I'm the guy who's focused on the business stuff,
yeah.
and you're like, well,
Well,
just write for the
it,
writing. But in this case, we're the other way around.
it's definitely a role change, but it's the finding out what to do with it for me always comes after. I'll write something and then try to figure out where to place it. And I know, and we're going to do a lot of talk about writing to market, and that is, I mean, that's the preferable way to write something that's saleable. But you can do it in the opposite direction as well, is write something and then figure out what market it fits into. Um, it's more difficult that way because you may have written something that doesn't have a market, and then you have to create a market, which is let's call it a bit of a crapshoot. But it's also, I mean, was at the conference, I think it was Becca Sim who said, I mean, the reason we have so many genres today, as opposed to like the 7 we had back in the 40s, is because people kept writing stuff that was difficult to classify. So yes, it's difficult to sell something that's completely brand new, and most likely you won't. But every once in a while, one will hit, and it's important that there are people out there continuing to try and stretch the field.
And
for the
something that I learned at the writers' conference in a similar vein was, the right to market 10 years ago was pick a genre and hit the dead center of it and crush that. And now it is the most of the good selling self-published books in the fiction world are semi cross genre books. They have a main genre and they have a side genre that's become a very common and acceptable thing. And 10 years ago, they would have told you you're just throwing money away doing that. But now it's become the thing.
Yeah, I tend to cross these days. Everything I write has noir in it. No matter what the genre is, there's going to be a touch of noir in it,
You're
which
just
is
a dark
fun
person.
for me. That is true. Well, the story I wrote for you was Dragon Noir.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's one of my favorite titles ever, too.
Yeah, the whole thing is great. I'm editing a dragon in an anthology about when dragons come back to the world, and Adam's story in it is excellent. And it's so many people just took so many of our authors, many of whom are fairly famous in this anthology, just went, oh, okay, set in the normal world with normal people and there's dragons. And Adam went, oh, a detective story. How about a noir detective story? And that's what I would love to see everybody do, something like that, where someone does a little thriller story and someone does and just put just dragons in the real world and add those things into it. You did it and most people didn't. And it's been interesting to edit some of those fairly well-known authors and see what their first drafts look like.
It's fascinating. I've been in writers groups. I got one person in the writer group whose first draft looks nothing like the final product. And we've learned that in critiquing them, that we critique the bits and we understand that the book won't look anything like it, but here's our critiques of this. And they're like, okay. And then the second draft will be completely different. And it's a wild drafting process, but it works. I mean, they're an award-winning successful writer. And it's fascinating to see the how different people's first drafts are, and at what point they'll share them with the critique group too.
In putting together some of the stuff, some of the resources for the website, I went through and kind of listed all these things because I'm more of a structure nerd than you are, and the 27 chapter and the 3 act and the 9 sections and the hero's journey and the save the cat and all of those things. I kind of, you have to take each of those things with a grain of salt, which the people who advocate for them don't. They will take them and apply them to every good book ever written, like an astrology, like a paragraph from an astrology in a newspaper. and just convince you that this is how all stories are written, and it's not. But they're useful things to have, and sometimes they're great inspiration for filling in a story or how your story should work, or getting rolling on these things. We'll do a whole podcast on structure at some point, but including writing prompts, and then we created a story builder for each genre where you just fill in the names of your characters and the things that happen into this like 2 paragraphs, and now you have your story in 2 paragraphs, and all these other tools that can help you kind of get moving, and then move on to a big list of writing tools that are also helpful. You use less of these things than I do. I think a lot of these things are pretty fun to at least to play with and get things out of, and you just kind of sit in your office and growl at anyone who comes close and pound away on your $8 keyboard.
That is my process.
Do you do any kind of outlining before you start a story, and do you use any software tools to do that?
I have looked at a lot of different software, and a lot of it looks amazing. And when I try to use it, I just get frustrated and give up, because all of it is just replicating a process that works fine for me. I've developed a process over the years with the tools that were available, and the tools that were available in 95, 2000 were not many. So my process is really just the multiple drafts of the story and a notes document, and so I like things like Scrivener and the Dynalist and outlining stuff, and some of these Plotter online, but it's extra work for me, and it's just I get frustrated trying to learn a new system that, like I said, replicates something that I'm already doing. It would definitely be more efficient for me to use these tools, but since I have a process to work that works already, it seems just like extra work for me. So I always suggest these tools to beginning writers, because I think they will help your workflow. But if you have something already in place, then I don't bother with them. But my kid uses Scrivener and a couple other things, and they do a lot of character work before they put pen to paper as well, writing backgrounds. I like the interview technique of interviewing your characters to ask them about their life. I don't tend to do that, but I think it's a great idea. There's a lot out there as far as tools that I think are great ideas that I don't use.
I
like you said, I sit in my office and pound away on my $8 keyboard. That's what I do. I've been sober 18 years, or I'm sure I would be doing it with a bottle of whiskey, in the traditional manner.
Right. But I wanted really simple and fast, because I will lose the things that are in my head if I don't get them out onto paper fast enough as they come through. So I end up using Dynalist.io, which is just very simple outlining software. It's super fast and easy to use, and it's in the cloud, which I like, and I can pull it up from anywhere. So I've actually outlined books sitting at the poker table on my phone. I can't do that with most of the other outlining software. Plotter's really slick. Novelist has some cool stuff. I've got a whole list of this software, and a lot of it's really slick and is just too much for me to get it open and get working on it and do learn all the things. It's just the same thing you said. It's just a lot. A Dynalist is really slick for outlining for me, but some people want a bunch of visual representation, or they want, and I think Scrivener is great. And I've done some collaboration stuff with people who want to use Scrivener, but then I've got to sync it to their Dropbox to have it backups shared back and forth, and then learn how to use the Scrivener again with going through the chapters. And it's not my thing. It's very useful software, and a lot of people love it. I just do it in Google Docs, and then I can just, wherever I am on whatever computer I am, I'm 2 clicks away from writing, and so that makes it easier and faster for me.
Yeah, there's no replacement for putting words on the page. and we will say that probably every podcast. Two things that you can't replace in learning to write, and that's writing and reading. I mean, there's nothing better for learning about whatever genre you're writing in than reading a ton of stuff in that genre. Modern stuff, old stuff, all the stuff that's hitting now, where that stuff came from. And for writing, there's no replacement for just writing a ton of words. Neil Gaiman said you should throw out your first million words, which to my mind is a bit extreme, but the real point is you're going to be a much better writer after writing a million words than you are when you start writing. And no matter how many books you read about writing, no matter how many podcasts you listen to about writing, there's going to be nothing better than writing a whole bunch of words. Everything else can help, but what helps the most is writing.
I was very lucky to be ushered into my first million words. I think that writing is just a thing that's in me, and I would have gotten there anyway. But it got a lot easier because I was at the beginning of the poker boom. Everybody wanted people to write about poker, and they were paying a lot of money for people to do it. And I didn't tell all my serious writer friends how much I was being paid because I knew they'd be mad because it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so I was writing columns.
Rates annoy me.
Yeah. I was writing columns and articles and writing things for websites and magazines and getting paid absurd amounts of money for I sold my first million words instead. But I think the key to Neil Gaiman's point is get your first million words done. Get a million words out there, however you can get them out. It was just easier for me to get them out because somebody was encouraging me to do it by sending me money. But just get those first million words done so you kind of know what you're doing.
See, that's funny. I was writing 4 articles a week for about.com on poker.
Right.
And I burned out on it after about a year. And they paid well, and it was a great per word rate. And I just, after 50 damn articles, I can't do it anymore. I have nothing left to say about poker. I can't do another top 5, top 10 list of something. I got nothing.
That kind of writing is tough where you're trying to find topics I could do a bunch more poker journalism and make a bunch more money doing it. And I just I can't use the same adjectives to describe somebody winning a tournament, again. I can't do those kind of news write-ups that don't have anything but things that bore me in them already. So it's very hard. But, I was getting $1,000 a month for a 1,500 word article in a magazine when I first started. And that's absurd for someone who's never published anything before. Right? It was an absurd number.
The poker boom was spreading money around like wildfire.
And then it wasn't.
And then it wasn't.
And now I have to do other things.
I got a friend who's a journalist and writes for CNN and stuff. And he's funny because we have talks about this, and I've got him writing a little bit of fiction now too. And he's like, it's amazing. You can just make stuff up. You don't have to triple source it and double check it and ask people if you can say what they said. And he's like, you just make stuff up and write it down. I'm like, yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm like, doing all that research and having to tell the truth, that sounds hard.
I did a little investigative journalism in the poker world last year, and luckily the website that I work with was willing to pay me for weeks to do this, to see what was going to come out of it. And nothing did. I know what happened. Right. I know who did what. I am sure of it, and I can publish nothing.
Right.
I had spent weeks researching and interviewing people and talking to people and got all this off the record stuff. And I know some really shady things that happened, and I cannot say a word about it. It is not, I can't get anyone on the record, and it's not legally cleared, and I just can't. There's nothing I can do.
Right.
It's very frustrating.
Isn't it easier just to make stuff up?
Yeah, that stuff is, yeah. And maybe I'll write it. Maybe I'll write it and call it fiction.
That's been done.
So I think our last topic is pantsing, meaning writing by the seat of your pants and not doing much plotting, in inherent conflict with market research and writing to market in self-publishing.
I don't think so, because you can still do a lot of writing to market stuff. You can study the market, you can study the tropes, the cliches, have those in mind as you're pantsing without plotting it out. And also, when people talk about pantsing, they tend to ignore the entire revision process. You're not pantsing a novel, you're pantsing a first draft. I mean, there's going to be extensive revisions. And pantsers have the most difficult revision process in general, because they've gone without a map. There's going to be inconsistencies. There's going to be structural problems. I had a big structural problem in the book I just wrote, but I ignored it and just kept writing on. And when I went back to revise it, it was a pretty easy fix. It was the only thing I worried about in the revision process, for that particular book, and it was frankly, it was an easy fix. So that was nice. But I don't think it's in conflict at all. It's just you need different approaches. And I think there's genres and beginning parts that lend themselves to different types of writers. Like a pantser is going to have trouble starting with a plot. If their idea for a book is a plot, you might have trouble pantsing it because you've got too much in your mind, and you'll come in conflict with the fact that your characters want to go one way and your idea goes the other way. Plotters are going to have
you might be making the same mistake that I was going to bring up. I think a lot of people see pantsers as this, like, they have no idea what's going to happen.
Right.
They just sit down at the keyboard and just like wild hair, and words fly out everywhere. And then there's okay, it's this thing. And that's, you have a lot of control over this process. If I'm pantsing something, I can know absolutely where it's going or what the plot's going to be or whatever. I've got things in my head. I'm not just like watching the keyboard to see what comes out of my hands. I'm still, you still have control over this. So you can still be pantsing a novel without doing a ton of outlining, and also know where it's going to end, and think about putting the right tropes in, and think about all the things, all the market research you've done to make those things fit. You can still put those in. You have control over this process. Yeah. You're still running the show.
And also pantsing and plotting is not a binary. It's it's nothing in any creative process is as linear as that. Yeah. It's all a mess.
I am fairly plot fluid.
Through. I am extremely plot fluid. I like to I'm very much, the characters have to drive the action. And if the characters come in conflict with the plot, I either got to kill the character, change the character, or change the plot. I mean, it's just,
it is. If you want to know what Adam's books are like, just notice that his first thing he thought of was, if there's a conflict, I need to kill the character. And it's like the third time in this podcast he's mentioned solving problems by just immediately murdering a character.
Is the funny thing is, I meant to say change the character, but it came out kill the character. I killed a character in one sentence once because I had kind of a walk-on character. He was very interesting. I didn't know what he was gonna do. But I realized that he was kind of screwing up my buddy dynamic between my two main characters. So I killed him. Just right at the head of a chapter. Boom. One sentence. Gone. Dead. I'm like, problem solved.
And then he fell down dead. On to the next. Yeah.
Yeah. Though I've had in a couple of books, I've had characters walk on who became absolutely key characters. I've had them walk on and become point of view characters, and and often these are characters I've planned out all my other characters and a little bit of the plot. And then this character walks on and they just take over and they're just fascinating. And I go, okay. And I have to reconfigure the book to give them an important part in there. And it's really fun.
Well, I think we've killed an hour here.
Well done to us.
And
I think we still need another hour or two on getting started.
I think so. Yeah, we're definitely not there. I mean, it's a process and a piece of the process that we'll get back to multiple times over the course of this thing. We've got lots of episodes coming. So we're gonna at the end of every episode, we're going to offer a prompt or an exercise, something that will help people with the subject of that episode. So give people something to help them get started. What should they go do immediately?
I think that if I would like you, if you think of yourself as a pantser, I'd like you to go and outline something and then try and write it. A chapter, a scene, a story. Just try it from the other side. And if you're a plotter, try just sitting down and writing something. Don't, as soon as you have an idea, just start writing it. Don't try and plan it out. Just to take a look at the world from the other side of the tracks.
That's a good that's a good thing. That was actually valuable for me when I started doing that, trying out all the things. I would like people to start asking themselves questions. Write out, open a Word document or a Google Docs document or a Scrivener or whatever it is you do. Grab a notebook and a number 2 pencil and start asking yourself questions about your story. If you're stuck and you're not writing, ask yourself why and what your character would do. There's always a way to get past that by asking yourself questions. So write down those questions. I have a plot. So who goes in this plot? What do I know about this plot? Where should it take place? All those things. Come up with your list of questions and then answer them all. And now you've got a reason to write. So do it as an exercise.
Excellent.
This has been fun and educational. Part of continuing to doing this podcast was so that I can keep learning things, and that has happened both times so far. So we'll hope that keeps up. Next week, what is the second part of the process? Is it just going to be writing a draft?
The first draft.
First draft.
The first draft. How to get through the first draft.
I didn't like that until I did it, and now I love it. I love writing a draft now. All right, we'll see you next week.